It is the year 2068. I've just ordered my first car and it has arrived from Moscow after 2 days. It was shipped by sea via the Arctic, where polar bears used to roam across the now dissolved patches of ice. This is very convenient compared to the past when goods were shipped from Europe and they crossed the Atlantic Ocean and arrived with much longer delays. The Arctic gold rush of the first half of the 21st century has led to this reality. Right now, the Arctic gold rush is underway with countries expanding into the Arctic. As global warming persists, the Arctic is being transformed into a promising place for colonization, resource extraction, and maritime transport. The beginning of this transformation was the steep decline in Arctic sea ice that began in 2002. Since then, the Arctic sea ice mass has declined exponentially and has now reached a yearly minimum of 4.37 million square kilometers, which is only 57% of the 1980 yearly minimum. The environmental conflict in the Arctic has become a geopolitical crisis in the last decade. The tensions between nations persist and resources on our planet dwindle, making the Arctic resources very pertinent. The Arctic could become a battleground between countries with competing interests. A race to exploit the resources being revealed and the sea passages opening in the Arctic is happening right now. As a nation with territory in the Arctic, Canada has a crucial role to play and has the power to arrange the future configuration of the Arctic. As the ice thins, resources that could never be exploited before are now being revealed. For example, large mineral deposits scattered throughout the Arctic contain practical and precious metals such as zinc, lead, magnesium, and nickel. Also, access to Arctic fish and immense freshwater bodies is increasing with a vaster surface of free water. Ironically, the Great Melt is likely to yield the very commodities that precipitated it, fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are the most important resource in the Arctic because of their great demand and their great quantity in the Arctic. The Russian Ministry of Natural Resources has calculated 586 billion barrels of oil on the territory claimed by Russia, but this is unproven. Just to give you an idea, Saudi Arabia has 260 billion barrels of current proven oil reserves. The population of the Earth is growing while the quantity of resources remains fixed, making the resources in the Arctic very, very desirable. New possible shipping lanes are also being opened. The Northern Sea Route, the Northwest Passage, and the Northern Sea Route, the Northwest Passage, and the Transpolar Sea Route are all passages that are being opened. The Northern Sea Route runs from the Kara Strait, right there, and then runs all the way to the Bering Strait. This sea route has, until now, it has not been a very, it hasn't been possible to use because of the ice coverage. But as the ice parts and it becomes an increasingly promising trade route, the question remains, who has power over the NSR and how will it be developed? On the other side of the Arctic Circle, the Northwest Passage starts in the Baffin Bay, goes through the Arctic archipelago and ends in the Bering Strait. The Northwest Passage runs through Canadian territory, making it leading to contested claims about the sovereignty of the passage. The Northwest Passage could have cultural consequences once fully operational. Think of Vancouver, BC, which has a large Asian community inside BC, Vancouver, because of Asia just across the Pacific Ocean. We could predict a diversification of cultures in eastern Canada because of the Northwest Passage. It's as if a big key has been unlocked, and instead of going all the way down through the Arctic like that, it's hard to imagine because this is not a round globe, but the Arctic is much longer distance than a distance something like this. So maybe Scandinavian tourists or Eastern European tourists would show up in Quebec in a few years. The Transpolar Sea Route is not open yet because of the coverage, the ice coverage that is still present. However, it's expected to open in the first half of the 21st century, in the middle of the first half of the 21st century. This sea route will drastically change the global economy due to its location and practicality. Items being produced on the other side of the world will be shipped in a day or less, and will even be cheaper at that. The combination of the sea passages and the resources make the Arctic a very strategic location. It is also an area of growing Russian and Chinese cooperation. Despite not being on the Arctic Council, China is very interested in becoming one of the stakeholders of the Arctic for research, resource extraction, and the Transpolar Sea Route. With Russia fighting in Ukraine, it grows weaker, giving China the opportunity to push its view that Arctic governments does not only belong to the Arctic Council. The Arctic Council is composed of the countries that have territory in the Arctic. It is an intergovernmental forum with the goal to facilitate cooperation, coordination, and communication between the Arctic states. It serves as a sort of protection against the possible military conflicts that could originate from the problems in the Arctic from the Arctic Gold Rush. Currently, Norway has chairship in the Arctic Council, and as a member of NATO, it will be very positive influence to the Arctic Council by supporting sustainable shipping and a green transition. This will help preserve the climate of the Arctic. However, it is inevitable. Eventually, the Arctic will become a big green forest sustaining life, about by the time the equator is too hot to survive in. So it actually works out quite perfectly. Now, back to Canada. Canada, as I explained, has the Northwest Passage running through the Arctic archipelago. This is part of Canadian territory, but even though Canada has declared the passage as internal waters, other countries such as the US declare this to be an international strait. This leads to problems between strong, powerful nations, which could eventually lead to a military conflict. Can you imagine a world where Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut have been annexed by a foreign nation who wanted sovereignty over the Northwest Passage? Rest assured, even though the Arctic Gold Rush could cause a military conflict between powerful states, which is definitely not good with the technologies and warfare that we have today, there is definitely room for negotiation and compromise. As I said, the Arctic is divided evenly with international borders, giving a sort of peace for now. However, countries will become more and more ambitious to exploit the Arctic. Also, the Arctic has enough resources to satisfy the needs of many, making it a bit more reassuring. But when I say this, the future of humanity is the Arctic. Thank you for your time.